The alarm woke me before my eyes even opened. Red light filled the cabin. Not the soft warning glow we trained with. This was the real one. The one that meant a ship was about to die, and it might be mine. I rolled out of the bunk and my boots hit the deck plating hard. The whole hull was shaking. Somewhere below me, metal groaned like an old bridge under too much weight. Ethan Marsh, report to the bridge. The voice belonged to Captain Daniel Voss, and it did not sound like a man who wanted to repeat himself. I grabbed my jacket and ran. The corridor lights flickered as I moved. Our ship, the Ember Wolf, was old. Not broken down old, but old in the way that a knife gets old. Sharpened so many times that the blade is thinner than it used to be, but still cuts. She had been built during the years right after the quarantine ended, back when Earth finally had the resources to build something that could leave the solar system and not come back in pieces. I reached the bridge, and the doors slid open with a hiss. Grace Whitmore was already at the sensor station, her fingers moving fast across the display, her jaw tight. Oliver Bennett stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the main screen like it had personally insulted him. Lucy Hart sat at communications, headset on, eyes closed, listening to something none of the rest of us could hear yet. "Talk to me," I said, stepping up beside the captain. Captain Voss did not look away from the screen. Distress call. Encrypted, but not ours. Alliance encryption. Old style. The kind they stopped using 20 years ago because it is too easy to break. Why send an old code? Because whoever sent it did not have time to use a new one, Grace said without looking up. This was sent in a hurry. Real hurry. Lucy opened her eyes. Her face had gone pale under the headset light. "Captain, I have audio." "You need to hear this." She pushed the feed to the main speaker. The voice that came through was not human. It had that strange, layered quality that most translated alien speech carried. Like two voices speaking half a second apart, one high and one low. But underneath the translation, I could still hear the fear. Fear does not need a translator. It comes through in the pauses, in the way a voice shakes even when the words are calm. "This is Outpost Keth Vantar. We are requesting immediate assistance from any vessel receiving this signal. Our defense fleet has been destroyed. I repeat, our defense fleet has been destroyed. We do not know what this enemy is. We do not know how to stop it. Please, anyone, please." The message looped, then cut to static, then looped again. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a moment. I had heard distress calls before. Every soldier has. But there was something in the way, that voice cracked on the word please, that made my stomach turn cold. This was not a drill. This was not an exaggeration sent by a nervous outpost commander hoping for backup. This was someone watching their world end and trying, with the last working transmitter they had, to warn anyone who might listen. "Location," Captain Voss said. Grace pulled up the star chart. A small yellow dot blinked at the edge of Alliance territory, far past the borders that most ships considered safe. Keth Vantar, border colony. Population records listed at around 400,000. Mixed species settlement, mostly Telenari and Osek Ren. 400,000, Oliver repeated quietly. I looked at the star chart and did the math in my head without wanting to. It would take us 11 hours at full burn to reach that system. 11 hours was a long time when a colony was already screaming for help. "Who else got this signal?" I asked. Lucy's hands moved across her console. "That is the strange part. I am scanning the relay logs. This message went out to every registered Alliance frequency in a 50 light-year radius. Every single one. And?" She looked up at me, and I saw something in her expression that I did not like at all. And nobody answered. Not one ship. Not one fleet. We are the only response on record. The bridge went quiet again. I want to explain something, because if you are hearing this, and you were not alive during the years I am about to describe, you might not understand why that silence hit us the way it did. Humanity was not always part of the Alliance. We were not always welcome at their tables or invited to their councils. There was a long stretch of our history, still close enough that some of the people on this ship had grandparents who lived through it, when Earth was a dying world, and nobody came to help us either. I grew up hearing the stories from my grandmother. She used to sit on the porch in the evening and tell me about the years after first contact. when the alien scouts found Earth in the middle of its worst century. War on 3 continents, oceans rising, crops failing, millions of people with nowhere safe to go, and the aliens who found us, the very first species to make contact with humanity, looked at all of that suffering and decided the safest thing to do was leave us alone. They called it non-interference. That was the official term, written in careful diplomatic language in reports that took decades to become public. Non-interference. It sounded noble if you said it fast enough. It sounded like respect for a species' right to solve its own problems. But my grandmother had a different word for it. She called it abandonment. They quarantined our solar system, sealed it off, monitored it from a distance, and let us fight our own wars, survive our own plagues, and rebuild from our own ashes, all while they watched from orbit and took notes. Some of them, we found out much later, were not just watching. Trading companies with alien backing were quietly buying up mineral rights and resource contracts through human proxy corporations, profiting off a dying world while doing nothing to save the people living on it. We did not get help. We got observed. It took Earth almost 90 years to climb back out of that hole on its own. 90 years of war, then slow peace, then rebuilding, then finally reaching orbit again, with technology good enough to notice we were being watched the whole time. When we found out, there was outrage. There were protests outside embassies that had only existed for a few years. There were demands for reparations, for apologies, for anything that might explain why an advanced civilization had let an entire species suffer alone when they had the power to stop it. The answer we got, again and again, was some version of the same thing. You were not ready. Interference causes more harm than good. We were protecting the natural development of your species. Nobody who says something like that has ever been the one drowning, while someone else decides they are not ready to be pulled out of the water. So humanity built its own way up. We built our own ships, wrote our own laws for the stars, and when we finally applied to join the Alliance, we were given a designation that told us exactly how they still saw us. Deathworld species, unranked, observe with caution. That was us. Not enemies, not exactly friends, a curiosity, a cautionary tale about what happens to people who grow up with too much struggle and not enough safety. Alliance officers would talk about human aggression in hushed tones, like it was a disease we might spread if we got too close. Alliance diplomats would smile politely in meetings, and then quietly make sure human ships were never given command of joint operations. We were tolerated, we were watched, we were rarely trusted. And now, more than 60 years after that quarantine finally lifted, a distress call was going out across 50 light-years of Alliance space, and the only ship answering it belonged to the species nobody had bothered to save when we needed saving. I looked at Captain Voss. He had been quiet through all of this, staring at that blinking yellow dot on the star chart like it owed him something. "Sir," I said, "what are your orders?" He turned around slowly. Daniel Voss was not a large man, not the kind of captain you see in old recruitment posters, with a jaw like a cliff face. He was lean, gray at the temples, with the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being impressed by danger. He had served through the border conflicts, the ones the history books called skirmishes, because nobody wanted to admit how close they came to real war. "We are 11 hours out," he said. "Grace, is that the fastest route? There is a shorter path through the Kessin corridor, but it runs close to a debris field. Shaving off maybe 90 minutes, with risk. Take it." "Aye, Captain." Oliver stepped forward, his voice careful. "Sir, with respect, we are one ship. If a full Alliance defense fleet was destroyed at that outpost, what exactly do you think the Ember Wolf is going to do when we arrive?" It was a fair question. Captain Voss did not answer it right away. He walked to the viewport instead, looking out at the stars, the same stars that had watched Earth suffer alone for almost a century, without a single one of them sending help. "I don't know what we can do when we get there," he said finally. "Maybe nothing. Maybe we arrive too late and there is nothing left to save. But I will tell you what we are not going to do. We are not going to be the species that had the chance to answer a call for help and decided it was someone else's problem." Nobody argued with that. Lucy sent a return transmission to the outpost, short and simple, letting them know help was coming. There was no response. The silence on the other end of that channel felt heavier than any words could have. We spent the next several hours preparing. It is strange, the things you do when you know you are heading somewhere dangerous, and you have hours left to think about it. Oliver ran diagnostics on every weapon system twice, even the ones that had passed the first check clean. Grace kept the sensors sweeping every frequency she could reach, hoping for any updated information from the outpost, and getting nothing back. Lucy tried every relay station along our route, asking if any other ship had changed course to respond, and every answer came back the same. No other vessel had altered heading. No other fleet had been dispatched. I spent part of that time in the armory, checking gear I probably would not need on a ship, old habits from ground deployments that never quite left me. And part of that time I spent just sitting, thinking about my grandmother's voice on that porch, telling a story about a species that learned to survive because nobody else was ever going to save them. I thought about how strange it was that the very thing the Alliance feared about us, the toughness, the refusal to give up, the willingness to run toward danger instead of away from it, was about to be the only thing standing between an entire colony and complete destruction. Around hour 9, Grace called out from her station, and her voice had changed. It was tighter now, more urgent. "Captain, I am getting a partial sensor return from the outpost system. Long range, low resolution, but I am seeing debris, a lot of it, consistent with destroyed vessels." "How many?" She was quiet for a second, running the numbers. "Best estimate, based on debris signature and mass, 22 ships, maybe more. 22 ships, an entire defense fleet, gone, before we had even arrived."
"Any sign of the enemy vessel?"
Captain Voss asked. "Negative. Whatever did this is either gone, or it is using some kind of signature masking we have never seen before." I felt that cold feeling in my stomach again, the same one from when we first heard that recorded voice pleading for help. Whatever had wiped out an entire Alliance fleet at that outpost was still out there, and we were flying straight toward it with one ship. 2 hours to arrival, Grace said. Captain Voss nodded slowly, then turned to face the rest of the bridge crew. When he spoke, his voice was steady, in a way that made everyone else stand a little straighter. "I know what we are flying into. I know the numbers do not favor us, but I want every one of you to remember something in the next 2 hours. There are 400,000 people at that outpost who are still alive, waiting to find out if anyone in this galaxy cares enough to come for them. We know what that waiting feels like. Our whole species knows what that waiting feels like." He looked around the bridge, meeting each of our eyes in turn. "Nobody came for us. We are not going to let that happen to them." I felt something settle in my chest, something between fear and purpose, the kind of feeling that soldiers learn to recognize and use instead of fight. 2 hours. 2 hours until we found out exactly what kind of nightmare had torn through 22 warships without leaving a single survivor to explain how. 2 hours until the galaxy found out what happens when the species everyone underestimated finally shows up to a fight that everyone else ran from. The Emberwolf pushed harder through the dark, engines burning bright behind us like a promise, and somewhere ahead of us, in a system already painted with the wreckage of the powerful, something was waiting that had never faced a Deathworlder before. It was about to. The 2 hours passed slower than any 2 hours I had ever lived through. I spent part of that time walking the length of the ship, checking on the crew, not because anyone needed checking on, but because staying still made the waiting worse. The Emberwolf carried a crew of 42, small by Alliance standards, but every one of them had trained for exactly this kind of moment. I passed engineers running final checks on the reactor core, gunners double-checking targeting arrays that had already been checked twice, a young technician named Ryan Cole, sitting alone in the mess hall staring at a cup of coffee he had not touched. "You good?" I asked him. He looked up, startled, then nodded too quickly. "Yes, sir. Just thinking. About the mission. About my sister, actually." He turned the cup slowly in his hands. "She used to ask me why I joined up. Told her it was because I wanted to see the stars, but it was never really that." He looked at me, and there was something old in his eyes for someone so young. "My grandfather used to tell me what it was like during the quarantine years. How they used to look up at the sky and know something was up there watching them starve and doing nothing. He said the worst part was not the hunger. It was knowing they were being judged and found not worth saving. I did not have a response for that. There was not really a good one. I guess I joined so nobody would ever have to feel that way again, he said, not while I could do something about it. I put a hand on his shoulder and left him to his coffee. That conversation stayed with me as I made my way back to the bridge. It was not the only one like it. I had heard variations of the same story from a dozen different crew members over the years. Grace once told me her grandmother had been part of the first generation born after the quarantine lifted, raised on stories of a childhood spent watching the sky with fear instead of wonder. Oliver rarely talked about his family, but I knew his service record listed a hometown that had been one of the last regions to recover full infrastructure after the worst of the collapse. Every one of us carried some version of that history in our blood, whether we talked about it or not. We were not fighting for glory. We were not fighting because some council somewhere had ordered us to. We were fighting because somewhere deep in the memory of every person on this ship, there was an understanding of exactly what it felt like to need help, and receive silence instead. When I reached the bridge, Captain Voss was standing at the main console, watching the timer count down. Grace had her sensors locked onto the approach vector. Lucy sat with her headset on, monitoring every frequency that might carry news from the outpost, though nothing had come through in over an hour. 40 minutes, Grace said without turning around. I took my position near the tactical station, next to Oliver, who had not stopped scanning weapon diagnostics since we left the last system. Anything new on sensors? I asked him quietly. He shook his head. Debris field is getting clearer the closer we get. It is bad, Ethan. Worse than the first reading suggested. How bad? I am counting closer to 30 vessels now. Some of them are Alliance capital ships. The kind that are supposed to take a full battle fleet to bring down, not whatever hit this system. I felt that cold weight settle back into my stomach. Captain Voss turned from the console. Lucy, still nothing from the outpost. Negative, Captain. Last confirmed transmission was the original distress call. I have been broadcasting our approach on every open channel, in case anyone down there is still monitoring, but no response yet. Keep trying. Aye, sir. The minutes ticked by. I watched the star chart as our position crept closer to that small yellow dot, now surrounded by a scattering of red markers, each one representing a piece of destroyed hardware that used to be a warship crewed by people who had families waiting for them somewhere. At the 20-minute mark, something changed. Captain, Grace said, her voice suddenly sharp. I am picking up new signal traffic. Multiple frequencies. Encrypted. Definitely Alliance origin. Source? Not from the outpost. This is coming from further out. I think... She paused, cross-referencing something on her display. I think this is a fleet communication network. A large one. Lucy's hands moved fast across her console. Captain, I have confirmation. It is an Alliance relief fleet. Formal designation Sentinel Group 12. They are broadcasting a general order. Put it through! The voice that came over the speaker was crisp, formal, the kind of voice trained to project calm authority even in bad situations. This is Fleet Commander Alden Voss of Sentinel Group 12, to all vessels in the Keth Vantar system. Be advised, this system has been designated a total loss zone. All non-military vessels are ordered to withdraw immediately. Repeat, withdraw immediately, and await further instruction outside the system perimeter. I looked around the bridge, and I could see the same disbelief on every face that I felt in my own chest. Total loss zone, Oliver repeated slowly. They are writing off 400,000 people before they even arrive. That cannot be right, Lucy said, already working her console. Let me check the fleet composition. It took her less than a minute to pull the data, and when she read it out loud, the bridge went dead silent. Sentinel Group 12 is currently holding position 8 light hours outside the system boundary. They are not moving in. They are establishing what they are calling a containment perimeter. They are staying out there, I said, understanding hitting me like a physical blow. They are not coming to help. They are coming to make sure whatever destroyed that fleet does not spread any further. Captain Voss's jaw tightened. They are quarantining the system. The word hung in the air, heavy with a meaning that every human on that bridge understood in their bones. Quarantine, the same word that had defined the darkest chapter of our own history, now being used against an entire colony of living, breathing people who were still down there, still hoping, still waiting for someone to come save them. Captain, Lucy said quietly, there is more. I am picking up a secondary transmission on a different channel. It looks like internal fleet chatter, not meant for outside ears, but I caught it. Play it. The voice that came through this time was less formal, more strained, the sound of someone talking to a colleague rather than issuing an official order. Casualty estimates from Keth Vantar are total. No survivors detected in the debris field. Command is treating this as an unknown threat class, possible extra-dimensional or extragalactic origin. Recommendation is full containment, no direct engagement until threat profile is better understood. We are not equipped to fight this. Nobody is. The transmission cut out. I looked at Captain Voss. His face had not changed, not really, but something in his eyes had hardened into something I had only seen a few times before, always right before a decision that would define the rest of a mission. They think there are no survivors, Grace said. Captain, if that assessment is correct, we might be flying toward an empty grave. And if it is wrong, Captain Voss said, we might be the only thing standing between whatever survivors are left and total abandonment. He turned to Lucy. Open a channel to Fleet Commander Alden Voss. Captain, they have already given a formal withdrawal order. If we ignore it, and something goes wrong, that is going to fall entirely on us. No Alliance support, no rescue if we get into trouble. I am aware of that, Lieutenant. Open the channel. She did. It took almost 30 seconds for the connection to establish, long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence. Then the same crisp voice from before filled the bridge again, this time addressed directly to us. Unidentified vessel. This is Fleet Commander Alden Voss of Sentinel Group 12. You are approaching a restricted quarantine zone. Reverse course immediately and hold position outside the system boundary. Captain Voss stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. This is Captain Daniel Voss of the UES Emberwolf, registered under the Terran Deep Space Fleet. We are responding to a distress call originating from Outpost Keth Vantar. We do not acknowledge the withdrawal order. There was a pause on the other end, longer than the first one. When the fleet commander spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine surprise. Captain Voss, I understand the impulse, but you need to hear me clearly. We lost an entire defense fleet at that outpost. 26 capital ships, gone, in under an hour, with no confirmed cause. Whatever did this is beyond anything in our current threat databases. A single vessel, however well crewed, stands no chance against a force capable of that kind of destruction. With respect, Fleet Commander, there are 400,000 people who may still be alive down there. We intend to find out. Our sensors show no survivor signatures. Then we will confirm that ourselves, in person, rather than deciding it from 8 light hours away. Another pause. I could hear something shift in the fleet commander's tone when he spoke again, something almost like respect, fighting against protocol. Captain Voss, I cannot authorize this. If you proceed, you are doing so entirely outside Alliance command structure, and outside any guarantee of rescue or support. Understood, Captain Voss said. We are proceeding anyway. He cut the channel before the fleet commander could respond. The bridge was silent for a long moment. I looked at Grace, at Oliver, at Lucy, and saw the same thing reflected in each of their faces that I felt in my own chest. Fear, yes, but underneath the fear, something stronger. A decision already made, long before this moment, carried in the blood of every person who had ever heard a grandparent describe what it felt like to be left alone in the dark. 15 minutes to system boundary, Grace said quietly. Captain Voss nodded, then looked around the bridge one more time. They call us Deathworlders like it is a warning, he said, like it is supposed to make other species keep their distance. I have never understood why that word was supposed to be an insult. He turned back to the viewport, watching the growing debris field ahead of us catch the light of a dying sun. A world that produces people who do not run from death does not sound like a curse to me. It sounds like exactly what this galaxy needs right now. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. The Ember Wolf crossed the boundary of the quarantine zone, alone, unsupported, flying directly toward a system that an entire Alliance fleet had already decided was not worth the risk. Behind us, the containment perimeter held its position, watching, waiting, doing exactly what had been done to humanity once before. Ahead of us, somewhere in that field of wreckage, An entire colony was waiting to find out if anyone in this galaxy still remembered how to answer a call for help. We were about to give them their answer. The debris field looked like a graveyard made of metal. We crossed into the Keth Vantar system at low burn, weaving through pieces of wreckage that used to be some of the most advanced warships in the Alliance fleet. I stood near the forward viewport and watched chunks of hull plating drift past, some of them still glowing faintly from whatever had torn through them, others dark and cold, tumbling silently through space like the system itself was in mourning. "I have never seen damage like this," Oliver said, studying the sensor readouts. "These cuts are not explosive damage. Look at the edges. They are clean, almost surgical." "Surgical how?" I asked. "Like something sliced through solid battle armor, the way a blade goes through paper. No scorch marks, no fragmentation pattern you would expect from weapons fire. Whatever did this did not blow these ships apart. It cut them apart." I did not like the sound of that at all. Grace's voice cut through the tension on the bridge. "Captain, I am picking up something. Faint energy signatures, planet-side, consistent with active power systems." Captain Voss straightened. "Life signs? Working on it. The debris field is interfering with a clean scan. Get us closer to the outpost." The Ember Wolf pushed forward, threading through the wreckage with careful precision. I could see the outpost now on the main display, a cluster of habitat domes and industrial structures built into the side of a rocky moon, orbiting a gas giant that painted the whole scene in shades of amber and rust. Half of the outpost structures were dark. The other half flickered with weak, failing power, like a candle burning its last inch of wick. "Captain," Grace said, her voice rising with urgency, "I have confirmed life signs. Multiple signatures, planet-side, concentrated in what looks like an underground shelter network beneath the main habitat dome." "How many?" She worked the console for a few seconds that felt like an hour. "Best estimate, several thousand, possibly more. The scan resolution is not perfect, but Captain, they are alive. The fleet commander was wrong. There are survivors." I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. The first small piece of good news since this mission began. Not everyone was gone. Somewhere down there, people were still hiding, still hoping, still alive. "Any sign of the enemy vessel?" Captain Voss asked. "Negative. I am not detecting anything matching a hostile signature anywhere in the system." "That does not mean it is gone," Oliver said quietly. "Whatever this thing is, it cut through 26 warships and left no trace behind. I doubt our sensors are good enough to guarantee we would see it coming." Captain Voss nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Lucy, Zokenemwine, try to raise anyone in that shelter network." "On it, Captain!" It took several attempts, cycling through frequencies, before a response finally crackled through the speakers. The voice on the other end was female, breathless, speaking in the same layered translated tone we had heard in the original distress call, but far more ragged now, worn down by fear and exhaustion. This is Outpost Keth Vantar Shelter Control. Who is transmitting?" "This is Captain Daniel Voss of the UES Emberwolf. We received your distress call. We are here to help." There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like quiet disbelief. You came? The Alliance fleet told us to expect no further support. They said the system was being contained." "We are not part of that fleet," Captain Voss said. "We came anyway." Another pause, longer this time, and when the voice spoke again, it had cracked with something that sounded very much like held-back tears. Thank you, whoever you are. We did not think anyone was coming." "How many survivors do you have?" "Approximately 6,000, sheltered in the lower levels. We lost contact with the surface habitats several hours ago. We do not know what is happening up there anymore. Our sensors were damaged early in the attack." "Do you have any information on what attacked you?" There was a shaky breath on the other end of the line. It came without warning. No approach signature, no communication, nothing on long-range sensors until it was already inside our defense perimeter. Our fleet engaged immediately, and within minutes, ship after ship simply stopped transmitting. We watched 30 warships go silent in less time than it takes to explain what happened. Whatever it is, it does not fight like anything in our threat databases. It does not use conventional weapons that we could identify. It simply unmakes things. Ships, structures, anything in its path. I exchanged a look with Oliver, whose expression had gone grim. "Is it still in the system?" Captain Voss asked. "We do not know. Our surface sensors went dark shortly after the attack on the fleet. We have had no direct contact with anything on the surface since." Captain Voss turned to Grace. "I need a full sensor sweep of the surface habitats. I want to know what we are walking into before we send anyone down there." "Working on it, Captain." While Grace ran her scans, Lucy stayed on the line with the shelter control officer, gathering what information she could. The picture that emerged was worse with every detail. The outpost had been a peaceful research and mining colony, home to 2 allied species who had lived together for over 3 generations. There had been no warning signs, no unusual activity, nothing to suggest an attack was coming. One moment, life had continued as normal. The next, an unknown force had appeared without any detectable approach and began systematically destroying everything in its path. "Captain!" Grace said finally, her voice tight. "Surface scan complete!" "I am seeing extensive structural damage across all habitat domes. No hostile signatures currently detected on the surface. Whatever attacked this outpost appears to have moved on, or it is using some kind of cloaking technology that is defeating our sensors entirely." "Options," Captain Voss said, looking at the small group of officers around him. "We could stay in orbit and wait for a larger response fleet," Oliver offered, though his tone made it clear he already expected that suggestion to be rejected. "Given the Alliance withdrawal order, that could take days, if they come at all. 6,000 people are running out of air, water, and power down there," Lucy said. "The shelter systems were not built to sustain that many people for an extended period. If we wait, we might be waiting for a rescue that arrives too late to matter." I stepped forward. "Captain, I can take a small team down. We assess the situation directly, establish a secure evacuation route, and start moving survivors up to the ship while Grace keeps monitoring for any sign of the enemy returning." Captain Voss considered this for a long moment, weighing the risk against the alternative of doing nothing, while thousands of lives hung in the balance. "Take Oliver and 2 others," he said finally. "Grace, keep full sensors active during the entire operation. At the first sign of any hostile signature, I want immediate recall, no hesitation." "Understood, Captain." Within 20 minutes, I stood in the small shuttle bay with Oliver Bennett and 2 additional crew members, a quiet, steady engineer named Emma Foss and a young security specialist named Liam Turner. We suited up in silence, each of us running through our own private version of the same thought. We were about to walk into a place that had just witnessed the destruction of an entire defense fleet by something nobody could identify or explain. "You ready for this?" Oliver asked me quietly as we finished our equipment checks. "No," I admitted, "but that has never stopped us before." He allowed a small, tired smile. "Fair enough." The shuttle launched from the Ember Wolf and descended toward the damaged outpost, weaving between larger pieces of debris still drifting in low orbit. As we broke through the thin atmosphere and the habitat domes came into view, the extent of the destruction became fully visible for the first time. Entire sections of the outpost had been reduced to skeletal frameworks, structural supports left standing, while everything around them had simply been removed, as if some enormous force had passed through and erased matter, rather than destroying it through conventional means. There were no scorch marks, no signs of explosive impact, nothing that matched any weapon signature in our combined databases. "This does not look like an attack," Emma said quietly, studying the damage through the shuttle viewport. "It looks like erasure." Nobody had a response to that. We landed near the entrance to the underground shelter network, in a clearing that had once been a central plaza, judging by the remains of what looked like public seating and decorative structures now half buried in debris. The moment the shuttle doors opened, the silence hit me first. No wind, no ambient sound beyond our own breathing inside our suits. Nothing but an eerie stillness that felt heavier than it should have. "Stay sharp," I said, and the others nodded, weapons ready, eyes scanning every shadow as we made our way toward the shelter entrance. The walk across that ruined plaza took less than 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. Every piece of wreckage we passed told part of the story of what had happened here. A child's toy, half melted into a piece of collapsed flooring. A row of vehicles, their metal frames twisted and fused together in ways that defied normal physics. A section of wall with a strange, almost geometric pattern burned into its surface, like something had passed through the material and left behind a mark that was not quite damage and not quite anything else we could categorize. "Ethan!" Liam said quietly, his voice tight over the comm channel. "You seeing this?" I followed his gaze to a large open structure ahead of us, what had probably been some kind of gathering hall. Inside, dozens of shapes lay motionless on the ground, and for a moment my heart sank, certain we were looking at casualties. But as we got closer, something felt wrong about the shapes, off in a way I could not immediately place. We approached carefully, and as the details resolved, a cold understanding settled over all of us at once. They were not bodies. They were statues, or something like statues, perfectly preserved figures frozen mid-motion, mid-expression, made of some strange crystalline material that had not existed in this location before the attack. Dozens of them, arranged as if the moment of their transformation had simply frozen them exactly where they stood, running, reaching, calling out for help that never came. "What in the world did this?" Oliver whispered. I did not have an answer. None of us did. And somewhere out there, whatever had done this, was still loose in the galaxy, unidentified, unexplained, and utterly indifferent to the destruction it left behind. We had come to save whoever was left, but standing in that silent hall of frozen figures, I understood for the first time exactly how far outside anything familiar this threat truly was, and how much worse it might get before this was over. We moved through the shelter entrance in tight formation, weapons ready, none of us speaking more than necessary. The corridor leading down into the underground network was narrow, lit only by emergency strips that flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that made every shape ahead of us look like a threat until proven otherwise. The air inside my suit felt heavier than it should have, though I knew that was only my own nerves working against me. "Contact ahead," Liam said quietly, raising a hand. We froze. A shape moved in the darkness at the end of the corridor, low and quick, and every one of us tensed, ready for the worst. Then a voice called out, shaking but clearly frightened rather than hostile. "Please, do not shoot. We are survivors. Please." I lowered my weapon slightly and stepped forward. "We are not here to hurt you. We are the ones who answered your distress call. My name is Ethan Marsh, from the Ember Wolf. We are here to help." Slowly, figures emerged from the shadows. First one, then several more, all of them Telenari, tall and slender, with pale, luminous skin that seemed to catch even the smallest amount of light. Their eyes were wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief that I would remember for a long time afterward. At the front of the group stood an older Telenari woman, her posture straight despite obvious exhaustion, her voice steady even though I could see her hands trembling. "You are human," she said, studying me carefully. "The Deathworld species." "That is what some people call us," I said. "We were told your kind rarely gets involved in matters beyond your own borders, that you keep to yourselves, mistrustful of outside affairs after everything that happened to your world." "Sometimes that is true," I admitted, "but not today." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like relief passing over her features. "I am Vesa Oren, Shelter Coordinator. We have approximately 6,000 survivors distributed across 3 lower levels. Power reserves are failing. We have perhaps 18 hours before life support becomes critical. We are going to get everyone out," I said. "But I need to know everything you can tell me about what attacked this outpost." Vesa's expression darkened. "I wish I could tell you more. It came without warning, without any detectable approach. Our defense fleet engaged it in orbit, and within less than an hour, every single ship had gone silent. We watched it happen from our surface sensors before those failed as well. It did not fight the way any weapon we know of fights. Ships simply stopped functioning, then began to break apart, as if something had reached inside them and unraveled their very structure." "Did you see it directly? Any visual data at all?" She hesitated, then gestured for one of the younger survivors to step forward, a nervous, Osik Ren technician, who was holding a small damaged data device against his chest, like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Show them," Vesa said gently. The technician's hands shook as he activated the device, projecting a grainy, damaged recording into the air between us. The footage was corrupted, flickering badly, but for a few brief seconds, something was visible against the backdrop of stars, a shape that seemed to shift and reform, even within those few seconds of recording, dark and angular, in ways that made my eyes ache trying to focus on it, as if the shape itself resisted being fully perceived. Then the recording cut to static. "That is all we managed to capture before our systems failed," the technician said quietly. "We do not know what it is. Our sensors could not properly classify it. It does not match any known vessel type or biological signature in our combined databases." I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature inside my suit. Oliver stepped closer, studying the frozen frame of the recording that still hung faintly in the air. "That is not a ship," he said slowly. "Look at the way it moves in that last frame. That is not mechanical movement. That looks almost organic. Or something in between," Emma added quietly. "Something that does not fit cleanly into either category." Vesa nodded grimly. "Whatever it is, our historical records contain fragments of old warnings from species far older than my own. References to something they called simply the unmaking, a force that appears without pattern, without warning, and leaves nothing behind but destruction and silence. Most considered it myth. Ancient superstition passed down through generations of frightened storytellers. "Not anymore," Liam murmured. I looked back at the group of survivors gathered in that dim corridor. Families huddled together, children clinging to parents, elderly individuals leaning on whatever support they could find. All of them watching us with the same desperate hope in their eyes, the hope of people who had already given up on rescue and were now daring to believe it might actually be real. "We need to move quickly," I said, turning back to Vesa. "Can you organize your people into groups for evacuation?" "We will need to make multiple shuttle trips to get everyone up to our ship." "Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank us after everyone is safe," I said, though something in her expression told me she needed to say it now, in case there was no later chance to say it at all. I opened a channel back to the Emberwolf. "Captain, we have made contact. Approximately 6,000 survivors. Shelter integrity is failing. We need to begin evacuation immediately." "Understood," Captain Voss replied. "I am dispatching additional shuttles now." Grace has been monitoring sensors continuously, no sign of the hostile signature returning, but she reports something concerning. "Go ahead. She is picking up unusual energy fluctuations building at the edge of the system, consistent with some kind of large-scale gathering event. We do not know what it means yet, but I want this evacuation done fast, Ethan. Whatever that thing is, I do not think it is finished with this system." My stomach tightened. "Copy that, Captain. We will move as quickly as possible." Over the next several hours, we worked in a steady, exhausting rhythm, guiding groups of survivors up through the damaged corridors, past that silent hall of frozen figures that none of the survivors could look at directly without flinching, and out to the waiting shuttles. Additional teams from the Emberwolf joined the effort, and slowly, group by group, the underground shelters began to empty. I watched families reunite with relatives they had feared lost, watched children fall asleep the moment they were finally settled safely aboard the shuttles, watched elderly survivors weep openly, with a relief too large to contain. Every trip up to the ship carried a little more hope, a little less of that hollow, frightened silence that had filled the shelter when we first arrived. But every trip back down also carried a growing sense of urgency. Grace's warnings about the gathering energy signature at the edge of the system continued, each report a little more concerned than the last. On what we hoped would be one of the final evacuation runs, Vesa walked beside me toward the surface, having insisted on staying until every last survivor was safely aboard a shuttle before allowing herself to leave. "You did not have to come," she said quietly as we walked. "Your species owes us nothing, if anything, considering what your people endured because of choices made by others like the Alliance. You would have every reason to feel nothing for us at all."
I thought about that for a moment before answering. "Maybe that is exactly why we came," I said.
"Because we know what it feels like to need help and not receive it. We were not going to let that happen to anyone else if we had the power to stop it." Vesa studied me with an expression I could not quite read, something between gratitude and quiet reevaluation of everything she had been taught to believe about my species. "The stories about your people paint you as something to be feared, aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous to be near. Maybe we are all of those things sometimes, I admitted, but today, we are just the ones who came when nobody else would. We reached the surface as the final shuttle prepared for departure, and I helped Vesa aboard, watching as the shelter entrance disappeared behind us, hopefully for the last time, hopefully having given up every life it had been protecting. As the shuttle lifted off and began its ascent back toward the Ember Wolf, I looked out at the ruined outpost below, at that field of frozen figures still standing silent in the darkened hall, at the debris of 30 destroyed warships still drifting through the system, like a warning written in metal and silence. Grace's voice crackled through my comm, tight with urgency. "Ethan, get back here fast. Whatever was gathering at the system edge, it is moving, and Captain Voss thinks it is heading straight for us." I looked at the frightened, exhausted, hopeful faces filling the shuttle around me, 6,000 survivors now safely aboard the Ember Wolf, and understood with sudden, absolute clarity that the hardest part of this mission was not behind us. It was still ahead. The bridge felt smaller than usual when I stepped through the doors, every station occupied, every face tight with focus. "Report," I said, moving quickly to stand beside Captain Voss. "All survivors are aboard and secured in the lower decks," Grace said without looking away from her console. "But Captain, that gathering signature I mentioned earlier, it has resolved into something we can actually track now." "Show me." The main display shifted, pulling up a wide view of the system. At the edge of our sensor range, a dense cluster of energy readings pulsed steadily, growing brighter and more defined with each passing second. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Best guess. Based on the pattern, this is not a single vessel," Oliver said grimly. "This looks like a swarm. Dozens, maybe hundreds of individual signatures, all moving in tight formation."
"The same signature as the attack on the fleet?"
"Signature match is inconclusive. The readings are too strange for our systems to properly classify. But the movement pattern and energy profile are close enough that I would bet everything I have that this is connected." Captain Voss's expression had gone very still, the way it always did right before he made a decision that carried real weight. "Time until it reaches our position? At current speed, approximately 40 minutes, Grace said. 40 minutes. I did the math instinctively, the same calculation every soldier learns to run without thinking. 40 minutes to prepare a single aging warship, carrying 6,000 rescued civilians, against a force that had annihilated an entire Alliance defense fleet without apparent effort. "Options," Captain Voss said, looking around the bridge. "We run," Lucy said quietly. "Full burn out of the system, away from the quarantine perimeter, and hope we outpace whatever that is. With 6,000 additional passengers aboard, our maximum burn speed is significantly reduced," Grace pointed out. "If that swarm moves faster than we estimate, running might not be an option at all." "We could try reaching the Alliance fleet at the system boundary," Oliver suggested. "Even if they will not engage directly, maybe they would provide cover for an evacuation route." Captain Voss shook his head slowly. "Fleet Commander Alden Voss made it clear where the Alliance stands on direct engagement. I would not count on their support arriving in time, or at all." I stepped forward, looking at the pulsing cluster of signatures still gathering strength at the edge of the display. "Captain, what if running is not actually our best option?" Everyone turned to look at me. "Explain," Captain Voss said. "That swarm destroyed an entire fleet of modern warships without apparent difficulty. If it can move that fast and hit that hard, outrunning it with a ship this size, carrying this many extra passengers, seems unlikely no matter which direction we go. But maybe speed is not the advantage we actually have." "Then what is?" Oliver asked. "Unpredictability," I said. "Every species this thing has faced so far has fought it the same way. Organized formations, standard tactics, predictable engagement patterns. That is exactly how it tore through the Alliance fleet in under an hour. If we fight the same way, we get the same result." Captain Voss studied me carefully. "You are suggesting we engage." "So I am suggesting we do not fight fair," I said. "We use everything about this ship and this crew that makes us unpredictable. Every advantage that comes from being the species nobody in this galaxy really understands." There was a long pause on the bridge. I could see the weight of that suggestion settling over everyone, the terrifying scale of what I was proposing. "If we are wrong, Grace said quietly. "We lose everyone aboard this ship. Every survivor we just saved, our entire crew, everything. If we run, and it catches us anyway," I said, "we lose the exact same thing, except we lose it while doing nothing but waiting for the end." Captain Voss looked at the display for a long moment, watching that swarm continue to gather and grow at the edge of the system. Then he straightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the same steady certainty it always did, in moments that mattered most. "Grace, I want full sensor analysis on that swarm's movement pattern. Every scrap of data you can pull. Oliver, prepare every weapon system we have, and I want creative firing solutions, not standard engagement protocols. Lucy, keep trying every channel, in case anyone out there changes their mind about helping." He turned to me. "Ethan, get down to the lower decks. I want the survivors as secure as possible, and I want you coordinating with Vesa to see if there is anything useful we can learn from Alliance records about this threat. Anything at all that might give us an edge." "Aye, Captain." As I made my way toward the lower decks, the ship's internal alert system activated. A steady tone, accompanied by Captain Voss's voice, announcing the situation to everyone aboard, survivors and crew alike, with the same calm clarity he brought to every crisis. I found Vesa in one of the crowded lower deck compartments, sitting among a group of exhausted but increasingly alert survivors, all of whom had clearly heard the announcement and understood exactly what it meant. "You are going to fight it," she said as I approached, not a question. "We are going to try to survive it," I corrected, "and hopefully protect everyone aboard this ship in the process." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "There may be something in our archives that could help." Before communications failed completely, our research division was compiling historical references to threats matching this pattern, fragmented, incomplete, but perhaps useful. She led me to a small group of OSEC-REN researchers who had managed to salvage a portable data terminal during the evacuation. Together, we pulled up everything they had gathered, fragments of ancient text, half-translated warnings passed down through generations of species who had encountered something similar long before recorded Alliance history began. The picture that emerged was unsettling. Every reference described the same basic pattern. A force appearing without warning, moving in coordinated swarms, unmaking rather than destroying, and most importantly, exploiting predictable, rigid tactical responses. Every historical account of a species attempting to fight this threat, using conventional, disciplined military doctrine, ended the same way: total loss. But there was one fragment, older and more damaged than the rest, that caught my attention. A brief mention of a species, name lost to corruption in the data, that had apparently survived an encounter, not by defeating the swarm outright, but by refusing to engage it the way it expected. Erratic movement, improvised tactics, a refusal to retreat even when logic suggested retreat was the only rational choice. "This matches what I was thinking," I murmured, showing the fragment to Vesa. "It does not fight an enemy that refuses to follow the rules it expects." "You believe your species can do that? Fight without a predictable pattern?" I thought about every story I had grown up hearing, every account of humanity clawing its way back from near total collapse, using nothing but stubborn refusal to accept defeat as an option. I thought about Captain Voss's willingness to ignore a direct Alliance withdrawal order. I thought about Ryan Cole in the mess hall, talking about joining up so nobody would ever have to feel abandoned the way his grandfather once had. "I believe it might be the only thing my species has ever been good at," I said. I relayed everything we had found back to the bridge, and Captain Voss absorbed the information with the same steady focus he brought to every piece of intelligence, good or bad. 20 minutes until contact," Grace announced, her voice tight. Captain Voss straightened, looking out at the growing swarm signature now clearly visible even on visual sensors, a dense cluster of shifting, shimmering shapes that seemed to defy easy classification no matter how long you looked at them. "All hands, this is your captain," he said, his voice carrying through every deck of the ship. "In a few minutes, we are going to face something that has already destroyed a full Alliance fleet without apparent effort. I will not pretend the odds favor us. But I want everyone aboard this ship, crew and survivors alike, to understand something clearly. This crew, and the species we come from, was forged by circumstances that would have broken most others. We know what it means to face impossible odds, and refuse to accept the ending everyone else assumes is inevitable." He paused, and I could hear the weight of history in the silence that followed. Nobody came for us when we needed help most. Today, we came anyway, for people who needed us. We are not going to stop now, and we are not going to fight this the way it expects to be fought. The swarm continued its approach, closing the distance with terrifying speed, and somewhere deep in that dense cluster of shifting shapes, whatever force had already claimed 26 warships, and an untold number of lives prepared to meet an enemy it had never encountered before. An enemy that did not know how to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed like the only possible outcome. The swarm filled our main display now, close enough that individual shapes within it had become distinguishable, each one shifting and reforming in ways that made the eye want to look away and focus somewhere else instead. 10 minutes, Grace announced, her voice steady despite everything. I had returned to the bridge, standing beside Captain Voss as he studied the approaching threat, with an intensity that reminded me why he had earned his command in the first place. "Oliver, talk to me about our firing solutions," Captain Voss said. "Standard targeting protocols are useless against something that does not hold a fixed shape," Oliver replied, his hands moving quickly across his console. "I have been working with Grace to develop something different, using randomized firing patterns instead of locked targeting. If this thing predicts and adapts to conventional attack patterns, an unpredictable spread might be the only thing that actually connects." "Do it!" "There is something else," Grace added, pulling up a new set of data on the display. "I have been analyzing the wreckage from the Alliance fleet more closely. Every ship that engaged used standard formation tactics, moving in coordinated groups, maintaining consistent distance and firing patterns. The swarm seemed to anticipate every single maneuver before it happened. So it reads patterns," I said. "That is my theory, which means our best chance is breaking every pattern it might expect from us." Captain Voss nodded slowly, then turned to the ship-wide comm system. "All hands, prepare for direct engagement. Non-essential personnel, remain in secured positions on the lower decks. This is not going to be a conventional fight, and I need every one of you ready for that." The swarm closed the remaining distance faster than any of us expected, and within moments, the first wave made contact. The ship shuddered violently as something unlike any weapons fire I had ever experienced tore across our outer hull. Not an explosion, but something that felt like the very structure of the ship was being questioned by whatever had touched it. "Hull integrity at 92%, Grace called out. "Whatever that was, it is not conventional damage. I am reading structural degradation at a molecular level. Return fire. Randomized pattern. Now," Captain Voss ordered. Oliver's hands moved fast, and the Ember Wolf's weapon systems fired in a deliberately chaotic spread, breaking every standard firing convention we had ever trained with. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen, the shifting shapes of the swarm continuing their advance unaffected. Then one of the shapes flickered, distorted, and simply stopped moving. "Contact," Oliver said, disbelief evident in his voice. "We hit something. It actually worked." "Do not celebrate yet," Captain Voss warned. "Grace, status on the rest of the swarm." "Still advancing." That was one signature out of what looks like over 200. We barely scratched it. The ship shuddered again, as more of the swarm made contact with our hull, each impact sending fresh waves of structural stress warnings across every console on the bridge. I gripped the edge of my station, feeling the ship groan beneath the strain, and thought about the 6,000 survivors and 42 crew members depending on us to somehow hold this line.
"Captain!" Lucy called out, her voice tight. "I am picking up a new transmission."
"It is Fleet Commander Alden Voss. Put him through." The Fleet Commander's voice filled the bridge, and this time, all the formal detachment from before had been replaced by something closer to genuine alarm. "Ember Wolf, we are reading massive engagement signatures from your position. Report status immediately." "We are engaging the hostile swarm directly," Captain Voss replied, his voice steady even as the ship shook around him. "Randomized firing patterns are proving effective against individual targets, but we are heavily outnumbered." There was a pause, and when the fleet commander spoke again, something had shifted in his tone. "Captain Voss, that should not be possible. Our analysis indicated conventional weapons had no measurable effect on that threat class. Conventional tactics did not work, Captain Voss said. Unpredictable ones do. Another pause, longer this time. Captain, hold your position. I am bringing Sentinel Group 12 into the system. If your tactics are genuinely effective, we may be able to reinforce your engagement. For the first time since this entire crisis began, I felt something like real hope flicker to life in my chest. Understood, Fleet Commander. We will hold as long as we can. The channel closed, and Captain Voss immediately turned back to the ongoing battle, unfolding across our display. The swarm continued its assault, and Oliver's improvised firing patterns continued to score occasional hits, each success buying precious seconds but nowhere near enough to turn the tide alone. Hull integrity at 78%, Grace called out, her voice tightening with each report. We cannot sustain this rate of damage indefinitely. Reinforcement fleet, time to arrival, Captain Voss demanded. At their current speed, approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like an impossible distance when our hull integrity was already dropping this fast. I thought quickly, running through everything Vessa's archived fragments had described, every historical account of species that had survived encounters with this kind of threat. The pattern kept repeating in my mind. Refusal to retreat, improvised tactics, a willingness to do what logic said should not work. Captain, I said, an idea forming rapidly. What if we stop trying to simply survive its attack pattern, and instead force it into a position where its own numbers become a liability? Explain. If it reads and predicts coordinated tactics, maybe we can use that against it directly. Feed it a pattern deliberately, then break it at the exact moment it commits to a predicted response. Grace's eyes widened slightly as she considered the idea. You are talking about baiting it into a formation, then hitting it with something completely unexpected, right as it locks into position. Exactly. Captain Voss considered this for only a moment before nodding sharply. Oliver, can you set that up? I can try. Grace, I need every scrap of predictive data you have on its movement pattern, right now. The two of them worked in frantic coordination, and I watched as Captain Voss guided the Emberwolf through a deliberately predictable evasive pattern, drawing a significant portion of the swarm into a tighter formation as it attempted to anticipate our next move. It is taking the bait, Grace called out, disbelief and hope mixing in her voice. The formation is tightening, exactly like we hoped. Oliver now, Captain Voss ordered. Oliver's hands moved with practiced precision, unleashing every weapon system simultaneously in a coordinated burst aimed directly at the tightened formation, breaking completely from the randomized pattern we had used before, catching the swarm in the exact moment it had committed to a predicted defensive posture. The result was immediate and dramatic. Dozens of the shifting shapes flickered violently and went still all at once, the tightly packed formation working against itself as our concentrated fire tore through targets that had clustered too closely together, unable to disperse in time. Direct hits across the formation, Oliver called out, something close to triumph breaking through his focus. We just took out a significant portion of that cluster. Do not slow down, Captain Voss ordered. Grace, find me the next pattern to exploit. The battle continued, brutal and relentless, every moment demanding new improvisation, new refusal to settle into any predictable rhythm the swarm might learn to counter. I watched Captain Voss guide the ship through maneuver after maneuver that should not have worked, that violated every principle of conventional tactical doctrine, and somehow, impossibly, kept working precisely because the enemy had never faced an opponent willing to fight this way. Hull integrity holding at 61%, Grace reported. Swarm numbers reduced by approximately 40%. Reinforcement fleet, status, Captain Voss demanded. 8 minutes out. 8 minutes out. 8 minutes! I looked at the display, at the remaining swarm still pressing its assault with undiminished ferocity despite its losses, and understood that the next 8 minutes would determine everything. We had shown this ancient threat something it had never encountered before, a species that did not fight the way logic dictated, that turned unpredictability itself into a weapon. But knowing that was possible, and surviving long enough to prove it, were two very different things. The ship shuddered again, under another wave of attacks, And somewhere in that chaos of shifting shapes and impossible physics, the true test of everything humanity had learned from its own hardest years was only just beginning. The next 8 minutes stretched into something that felt like hours, every second measured in the shudder of the hull and the steady drop of numbers across every console on the bridge. Hull integrity, at 52%, Grace called out, her voice tight but controlled. Weapon systems still holding, but we are burning through power reserves faster than projected. Keep the pattern breaks coming, Captain Voss ordered. Do not let it settle into anything predictable, not for one moment. Oliver's hands never stopped moving, cycling through improvised firing solutions, alternating between coordinated bursts and scattered randomized spreads, refusing to let the swarm find any rhythm it could learn to counter. Each maneuver bought us seconds, sometimes minutes, but the cost was climbing steadily with every exchange. I stayed near the tactical station, watching the battle unfold, occasionally calling out observations that Grace and Oliver used to adjust their approach. It was strange, standing in the middle of a fight this desperate, and feeling something other than pure fear. Underneath the fear was something steadier, a strange, grim pride in watching this crew refuse to break, refuse to accept the ending that any reasonable calculation would have predicted for us the moment this swarm first appeared on our sensors. "Captain!" Lucy called out suddenly. "I am reading new signatures entering the system!" Multiple large vessels, approaching fast. "Sentinel Group 12, Captain Voss said, relief evident in his voice for the first time since the battle began. "Confirmed," Lucy said. "Fleet Commander Alden Voss is hailing us directly. Put him through." The fleet commander's voice carried a new intensity when it filled the bridge this time, stripped of the formal detachment that had defined every previous interaction. "Ember Wolf, we are entering the system now. I have reviewed your engagement data, and Captain, I owe you an apology I do not have time to give properly right now. Your tactics are unlike anything in our combat doctrine, but they are working. Instruct my fleet on how to engage." Captain Voss did not hesitate. "Break every formation your ships normally use. No coordinated firing patterns, no predictable maneuvers. This thing reads and anticipates conventional tactics. The only way to hurt it is to refuse to fight the way it expects." There was a pause, and I could hear the fleet commander processing something that likely ran completely counter to everything his species' military training had ever taught him. "Understood, Captain. It goes against every principle we operate under, but understood. Sentinel Group 12, engaging now." The arrival of reinforcements changed the shape of the battle almost immediately. Dozens of additional warships entered the fray, and though their coordination was rougher, less practiced than our own hard-earned improvisation, the sheer additional firepower began to turn the tide, in ways that single ship alone never could have managed. "Swarm formation is breaking apart," Grace called out, disbelief and hope mixing in equal measure in her voice. "It cannot adapt fast enough to multiple unpredictable sources at once." I watched the display as the remaining swarm, already reduced by our earlier engagement, began to fracture under the combined pressure of the Ember Wolf and the arriving Alliance reinforcements. Individual shapes flickered and went still one after another, the swarm's coordinated advantage collapsing entirely as it faced an enemy that refused, on every level, to behave the way its ancient instincts expected. "Captain!" Oliver called out. "I am reading a significant change in the swarm's core signature. Something is different." "Different how?" I think the remaining cluster is retreating." The bridge fell silent for a moment as everyone processed that possibility. Retreat. A concept that, based on every historical fragment we had gathered, this ancient threat had apparently never needed to consider before. "Do not let up," Captain Voss ordered. "Grace, keep tracking that retreating cluster. I want to know exactly where it goes." The remaining portion of the swarm, perhaps a quarter of its original size, pulled back rapidly, moving away from the system with a speed that suggested genuine urgency rather than tactical repositioning. Within minutes, it had crossed back beyond the range of our sensors entirely, vanishing as suddenly and mysteriously as it had first appeared days earlier. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. The silence that followed felt almost as heavy as the battle itself had been. A strange, disorienting quiet after so many minutes of relentless tension. "Report," Captain Voss finally said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Hull integrity holding at 41%, Grace said. Damaged, but stable. No further hostile signatures detected anywhere in the system. Casualties. Lucy checked her console, and I watched her hold her breath for a moment before answering. Minor injuries reported across several decks. Nothing critical. All survivors and crew accounted for. I felt something in my chest release that I had not realized I was holding on to so tightly. We had done it. Against every reasonable expectation, against odds that any careful calculation would have called impossible, we had survived. And more than that, we had actually driven back a threat that had annihilated an entire Alliance fleet without apparent effort just hours before. Fleet Commander Alden Voss's voice came through the comm again, quieter now, carrying a weight that had not been there in any of our earlier exchanges. Captain Voss, on behalf of Sentinel Group 12, and frankly, on behalf of the Alliance as a whole, thank you. What your ship did here today should not have been possible according to everything we understood about that threat. I do not have adequate words for what I witnessed. You do not owe us words, Fleet Commander, Captain Voss said. You owe the survivors of Keth Vantar whatever support they need to rebuild, starting immediately. Understood, Captain. That will not be a problem. My fleet will begin relief operations within the hour. The channel closed, and Captain Voss allowed himself a long, tired breath before turning to look around the bridge at every exhausted, relieved face gathered there. Good work, he said simply. And somehow, after everything we had just survived, those two words carried more weight than any lengthy speech could have. I made my way down to the lower decks shortly after, wanting to check on the survivors before allowing myself to fully process everything that had just happened. I found Vesa near the same compartment where I had left her, surrounded by the same group of exhausted, hopeful researchers who had helped uncover those fragmented historical warnings that ended up saving all of our lives. You did it, she said as I approached, relief evident in every line of her exhausted face. You actually did it. We did it together, I said. Your archives gave us the edge we needed. We would not have known how to fight it without what your people preserved. She studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, some deep reconsideration of everything she had believed about my species before this crisis began. The stories we were told about your kind painted a very different picture than what I witnessed today. We were taught to see humanity as dangerous, unpredictable, something to be cautiously observed from a careful distance. Maybe unpredictable is not always a bad thing to be, I said, echoing something Captain Voss had said hours earlier, though it felt like it belonged to a different lifetime already. Vesa smiled, tired but genuine. I think the entire galaxy is about to learn that lesson very quickly. I did not fully understand yet how right she was. Word of what had happened at Keth Vantar would travel fast through Alliance channels, carried by every officer aboard Sentinel Group 12, who had witnessed a single human warship do what an entire fleet of advanced vessels could not. It would travel through diplomatic circles, through military command structures, through every corner of a galaxy that had spent generations viewing humanity as an unranked curiosity, tolerated but never truly respected. But standing in that crowded lower deck compartment, surrounded by 6,000 survivors who were alive only because Captain Daniel Voss had refused to accept a withdrawal order, I was not thinking about galactic reputation or shifting alliances. I was thinking about my grandmother's voice on that porch, describing what it felt like to be abandoned by the powerful when help was needed most. We had not repaid that old debt with resentment. We had repaid it by refusing to let anyone else experience what we once had. The Ember Wolf limped slowly toward the nearest repair facility over the following days, her hull scarred but her purpose intact, carrying 6,000 grateful survivors and a crew that had just rewritten every assumption the galaxy held about the species everyone had once called too dangerous to trust. But somewhere out in the deep dark beyond the edge of Alliance territory, the remaining fragment of that ancient swarm continued its retreat, wounded but not destroyed, carrying with it a lesson its ancient instincts had never needed to learn before. Humanity did not know how to accept defeat, and that fact alone was about to change everything the galaxy thought it understood about war, about courage, and about exactly who deserved to be underestimated. 3 weeks after the battle at Keth Vantar, I stood in a chamber I never expected to see in my lifetime, waiting for a session of the Alliance Council to begin. The room was vast, built to accommodate dozens of species with wildly different physical needs, different atmospheric requirements, different ways of sitting or standing, or simply existing in the same shared space. I had read about this chamber in history texts as a child, the seat of galactic governance, the place where humanity's application for membership had been debated, delayed, and finally granted, with the smallest possible designation the Alliance could assign us. I never imagined I would stand here as an invited guest, let alone as someone whose actions were the reason for the session taking place at all. Captain Voss stood beside me, along with Grace, Oliver, and Lucy, all of us wearing formal dress uniforms that felt stiff and unfamiliar after weeks spent in the practical gear of active duty. Vessa stood nearby as well, representing the survivors of Keth Vantar, her presence a quiet reminder of exactly why we were all here. "Nervous?" Grace asked me quietly, as the chamber slowly filled with delegates from dozens of member species. "A little," I admitted. "This feels stranger than facing that swarm." She allowed a small, tired laugh. "At least this time nobody is trying to unmake us." Fleet Commander Alden Voss approached us before the session began, offering a respectful nod to each of us in turn. In the weeks since the battle, he had become something close to an ally, advocating strongly within Alliance command circles for a complete reassessment of everything they believed they understood about human capability. "The Council has reviewed the full engagement report," he said quietly. "Every officer who witnessed what happened at Keth Vantar submitted testimony. I do not think there is a single delegate in this chamber today who has not heard some version of what your ship accomplished." "We did not do it for recognition," Captain Voss said. "I know," Alden replied. "That is precisely why they are about to give it to you anyway." The session began shortly after, and I listened as delegate after delegate rose to address the chamber, discussing the events at Keth Vantar, the destruction of an experienced Alliance fleet, the subsequent survival and counterattack led by a single human vessel that had ignored a direct withdrawal order to save 6,000 lives that official assessment had already written off as lost. There was debate, of course, some delegates raising concerns about the precedent of a member species disregarding formal Alliance directives, however successful the outcome had been. But even those voices carried an undertone of grudging, uncomfortable respect that had not existed in any prior conversation about humanity that I had ever witnessed or read about. Eventually, the presiding counselor, an elder representative of one of the Alliance's founding species, called for the formal statement to be read into official record. "For 60 years, the counselor began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, humanity has held the designation of unranked Deathworld species within this alliance. A designation applied out of caution, born from concerns about the aggressive tendencies your species developed surviving conditions few others in this galaxy have ever faced. This designation has limited human participation in joint military operations, restricted diplomatic standing, and maintained a persistent, unspoken distance between your people and full Alliance partnership." She paused, looking directly at where we stood. "The events at Keth Vantar have demonstrated something this council failed to properly understand for 6 decades. The very qualities we once viewed with suspicion, adaptability forged through hardship, willingness to act without waiting for permission, refusal to accept defeat as inevitable, proved to be exactly what saved thousands of lives, when this Alliance's most experienced forces could not." Murmurs moved through the chamber, a mixture of agreement and lingering uncertainty from different delegations. "Therefore," the counselor continued, "this council formally moves to reclassify humanity from unranked Deathworld species to full Alliance member status, with complete standing equal to any founding species, effective immediately." The chamber erupted into a mixture of applause and continued murmured discussion, and I stood there, absorbing a moment that generations of humans before me had fought and struggled and hoped for, without ever seeing it realized. I thought about my grandmother, gone now for several years, who had spent her final decades still carrying the quiet, unhealed weight of watching her own parents suffer through the quarantine years, without any outside help. I thought about every person aboard the Ember Wolf who carried some version of that same inherited weight, and about Ryan Cole in that mess hall, explaining why he joined up in the first place. We had not fought at Keth Vantar for this moment. We had fought because 6,000 people needed help, and nobody else was willing to give it. But standing here now, watching a council that had spent 60 years holding humanity at careful, suspicious distance, finally acknowledge what we were actually capable of. I understood that this moment mattered too, in its own quieter way. After the formal session concluded, Vesa approached me, her expression thoughtful. "How does it feel?" she asked. "To finally be seen the way you always deserve to be seen." I considered the question carefully before answering. Honestly, it feels less important than I expected it to. We did not save your people because we wanted a better designation. We did it because it was the right thing to do, the same way we wished someone had done for us, once, a long time ago. And yet the designation matters anyway, she said gently, not because you needed it to prove your worth, but because this galaxy needed to finally learn the lesson it should have learned generations ago. I thought about that for a long moment, and found I could not disagree. Captain Voss found me shortly after, standing near a viewport that looked out over the orbital platform surrounding the council chamber, countless ships from dozens of species drifting past in the vast open space beyond. "Quite a day," he said, joining me at the viewport. "Quite a few weeks," I replied. He was quiet for a moment, watching the ships pass. "You know, my grandfather used to say something to me when I was young. He said the galaxy would eventually learn that the hardest lesson to teach any powerful group is that strength earned through suffering is still strength, whether or not the people who caused that suffering are willing to acknowledge it." Sounds like he was right. He usually was. Captain Voss allowed a small, tired smile. "For what it is worth, Ethan, I do not think today's decision changes who we are. We were the same crew before this council decided we mattered. We will be the same crew tomorrow, regardless of whatever designation sits on our official records." "I know," I said. "But maybe it means the next time someone sends out a distress call, more than one ship answers it." Captain Voss nodded slowly, considering that. Maybe that is the debt finally being repaid, in the end. Not recognition for what we survived, but making sure fewer people ever have to survive what we did, alone. I looked out at the vast expanse of stars beyond the viewport, thinking about everything that had happened since that first alarm woke me from sleep weeks ago. Thinking about the frozen figures in that silent hall, about Vesa's trembling voice on that first transmission, about 6,000 survivors now safely rebuilding their lives because a single aging warship had refused to accept a withdrawal order. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of mapped Alliance space, the remnant of that ancient swarm was still out there, wounded but not destroyed, carrying with it a lesson it had never needed to learn before this day. And somewhere out there too, other worlds, other species, other outposts, would eventually face their own version of the darkness that had nearly claimed Keth Vantar. But now, for the first time in 60 years, they would not have to wonder if humanity would answer the call when it came. We already had, and we always would, not because the galaxy finally decided we deserved a seat at their table, but because we remembered exactly what it felt like to need help and receive silence instead, and we had chosen, every single time, to be something different than the silence that once nearly broke us. The galaxy had burned that day at Keth Vantar, burned with the fire of an old debt finally being repaid. But out of those ashes, something better had begun to grow. A partnership, built not on careful diplomatic caution, but on the simple, hard-earned truth that some of the greatest strength in this universe comes from those who once had none, and remembered exactly how that felt. I turned away from the viewport, ready to return to my crew, to my ship, and to whatever call for help came next, knowing without any doubt that we would answer it, the same way we always would from this day forward. Because that is what it means to finally repay a debt this old. You do not just remember the pain of being abandoned. You make certain nobody else ever has to feel it again.